this is the time of day where we're actually going to try and draw some threads together, talk a little bit about what we've learned, what we think about connecting the dots. A chance, if you will, to ask a few final questions about connecting those dots. So if I ask each of you to give us 3 or 4 minutes about what you think, how you're feeling about dot joining. I can hardly speak. That will just get us going, and then we'll get into the flow. So who's going to go first? Are you first, Richard?
Yeah, I'll go first. Okay. I work for BBC, as was just said. I work for BBC Three, so we're the sort of youth brand for the BBC. I'm looking around the hall. Probably most of you aren't in our target market.
That's
so
just
don't
rude.
feel a need like you have to watch. We used to be a TV channel, but now we're putting our content all over the place. So we're on iPlayer, but we're putting content on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram. We've got our website, etc. So in terms of this question of joining the dots, well, it's very sort of relevant to me because in our old world, it was quite easy. If someone said, how well is our stuff doing? There's one source. We're putting our stuff all over the place, all different data sets. We've got data sets from third parties that we don't own, and they mark their own homework. And it's very, very difficult. And one of the things we've sort of learned in trying to sort of give our stakeholders sort of a clear message of how well is our stuff doing is that we're having to make a lot of judgment calls as to how we how we integrate the stories from different data, how much weight we assign different things, telling people they can't just add these things up because they don't really understand that they can't. So one of the things I would say is that, you know, the sort of traditional roles that we have in terms of making those judgment calls is really important. And we should sort of think that, you know, what we do doesn't necessarily have to be perfect. Sometimes just good enough has to be good enough. And I think we need to be brave enough to tell our stakeholders that and, you know, to position that data correctly. One of the other things I would also say in terms of this whole idea of joining the dots, the BBC were a very siloed organisation with sort of empires, and they don't like to cooperate too much. Getting better, but still a long way from where it could be. One of the things that's really important, I think, and as was said by people earlier, is that I think it's really important to let stakeholders find the stories for themselves rather than us being the people to tell them the insights. If they sort of feel that they've generated them themselves, we help them get there, but they take that ownership. You know, sometimes if we let go a little, it can be more powerful and sort of mean that those insights are then brought through the business. And finally, the third point is sort of a three theme. I'd also say different perspectives lead to better outputs as well. One of the things that at the BBC we're really conscious of is trying to do well for our underserved audiences. So that's sort of basically people who aren't middle class, aren't wealthy, aren't in the southeast. We tend to do worse amongst those people. And we've sort of found that actually it's not just, you know, in terms of diversity of recruitment and the sorts of perspectives and different life views that you get from different people can really make a difference in terms of giving different perspectives on what we see and understanding our viewers, or for you to be customers, better.
Thanks, Richard. Claire?
Great. Well, I think we're a people-fueled industry, and while there's lots of tools at our fingertips, ultimately it's our people working with us that are the ones who can really make the outputs of this come to more than the sum of its parts by making sense of it, adding context, making it link back to our businesses and our objectives with clear plans and clear actions that are strategic, but also for all levels within the businesses through to tactical deployment. So researchers are naturally curious, and we need to encourage that. We need to make sure that we give our people space and time to grow and to be exposed to different scenarios, different stakeholders, different research approaches, different challenges, so that they can really build that, keep asking questions, encourage that curious nature that quite often people come into the industry being curious, but the sort of day-to-day life of just getting through the workload can mean that sometimes that goes out the window. we need to make sure that we use our agencies well. I think we've had quite a lot of conversation today about the role of agencies and the role of client side, and actually, you know, the best does come when we work together. We've got great expertise on both sides and different perspectives that need to be brought together, and we need to invest in those relationships to make sure that agencies can help us to the best of their abilities. Sorry, I've lost my notes. So my organisation has built up not only a profile and a reputation within the Insight team that everyone looks to us, and part of that is by building really strong relationships across the business. I think I'm quite fortunate, and our team is quite fortunate that actually as a company of about 70 or so, we have the space and capacity to know everyone in the building and to be able to have those personal conversations. But we've actually moved away from dashboarding portals and things like that because actually people weren't using them. They'd rather come and talk to us because they know the relationship. They know that we will guide them through it and we will help them to make sense of something more than just a number, what it means to them, what that means they need to do, and therefore where to go next with it. Part of those relationships is about being able to dig into questions, to not just answer the question we're asked, but to dig in beyond that, to get to the root of the challenge rather than just analysing and looking to answer some of the symptoms along the way. I think that's really where Insight teams can add real value, and people, by working closely with all the other teams, can then see the impact of research, not just as, oh, they've told me this number, but I can see where that piece of insight has taken the business, how it's changed our strategy, and therefore how it's had real value for everyone through it.
Thank you, Claire. Cristina?
Well, my perspective probably in the panel is from the agency or consultancy side, so it's slightly different to your experience and what it means, you know, to get a greater insight. But from the neuroscience perspective, the Walnut is trying to lead the market. Is that actually when I founded Walnut was how can I integrate it with traditional market research? And I think this is how we are really growing. And I think part of this success has been because I think clients now know that emotion is the ultimate profit, and they want to quantify, you know, how much emotion, you know, my stimuli are triggering. But at the same time, I want to have research that is comprehensive. And I think when we erupted 10 years ago with neuroscience, we were saying, like with fireworks, we are going to replace market research, you know, and it was like totally wrong. And it was a positioning that it was really not constructive. And I think the way that we have been able to grow and to be meaningful as another data, another point of data, has been actually trying to see where are the maybe the gaps of knowledge that this particular modeling or trade-off techniques, you know, something for very quant perspective, and we can add emotion, you know, and how we can inject emotion with web testing, because it's just beyond the click. You know, how we can understand designs, and today when Joe was talking about designs, don't change your pack too much. You know, we understand now why, you know, and because if you destroy your brand assets, you know, and this is implicit techniques can provide you these learnings that go beyond the explicit and when people is able to articulate. And I think this morning as well, we have hearing great examples of how, I think they all showing that there's finally market research is less linear in their thinking, and this means that there's no silver bullet that can explain human complexity. And I think this is wonderful news, you know, that humans are as complex, that we have room for everyone, you know, to explain a little bit of this complexity. And I think I have different examples, you know, that we have been doing with my colleagues, the company who acquired Walnut, that we are working together, and actually we are, maybe sometimes we are a little bit more expensive, you know, because it's another sort of data, but clients are happy and able to pay this greater insight for having another database.
That's great, thank you. Now, I've got questions, but I'd rather take questions and comments from the floor, if we have.
People are tired.
Yes, I see. Dave, thank you, yeah.
Hi, David Penn from Conquest. Probably a question for Cristina. Cristina, I know you used to work for a big market research company. I won't say who it is, but we all know. Do you
The
think...
big ones. One of the big ones.
The big pink one.
Right. I mean, given your comments about, you know, the need to embrace all the new psychological thinking, neuroscience, behavioral economics, et cetera, do you really think that the bigger companies have done enough to move market research in that direction? You can see where I'm coming from with that question, but I'd be interested in your perspective.
I think they are trying hard to have, maybe it's not particularly this pink one, but the others are trying hard to have the experts. The only thing is that they are some of them can struggle to really make the business scalable. That is probably the need, you know, that these big market research companies is that the business that they are based on. And I think they are playing now a better role that they used to play in the past. I think Nielsen is a great example of having a unit, you know, trying to change these perceptions and offering to certain clients this. And I think they couldn't do differently. You know, I think that from many clients and big clients and small clients, there was this demand that they couldn't not to listen or to have response to. But probably the credibility, you know, of them doing this, you know, would be probably different to when you go to a boutique or an agency like us.
Cool, thank you. Gentleman at the table here.
Hello, Richard, Edward here. You mentioned that BBC was a siloed organisation, but it was improving, and today's theme is joining the dots. Have you got anything you can share in terms of how the Insights has helped bridge the boundaries, break down silos, go across organizational structures so you have a more, I hate the word, holistic approach to data understanding?
Yeah, so one of the things we've developed, and there's two things. One of the things we've worked quite hard across the organisation is to sort of, we've got insight teams embedded within different divisions. So there's, you know, what used to be a radio team, what's now called a content team, but then there was a digital team, and they each have separate insight functions. And it sounds crazy, but they probably didn't talk to each other in quite the right ways that facilitated the sort of joined up thinking in terms of the way we talk to our audiences and pooling of resource and pooling of insight and joining up the stories from different areas. So we've sort of worked really hard over the last couple of years since I've been there particularly to actually join the teams up and have sort of virtual teams that meet quite often. One of the other things we're doing is, in terms of breaking down those silos, is actually our insight people, rather than working solely to one bit or other of the organisation, we're now starting, particularly at the more junior level initially, is starting to get them sort of working, say, 2 days a week here and 3 days a week there. So actually you're getting people, rather than, we want specialists in a sense that unless they understand that particular area of the market and that particular platform, they won't know enough to talk to their stakeholders. But there's also a value in them actually broadening their skills and broadening their perspectives. And that helps also when they're sort of interrogating their own division, because they've seen other things from other areas. So there's a number of things we are doing on that approach. I think working across different bits of an organisation, I'm sure lots of massive organisations have these sort of matrices. Trying to get, splitting people up and sort of pushing them in different bits can actually be quite helpful.
Claire, do you suffer from that at all, or are you still of the size where that's not become a problem?
We've gone through periods where we've had some silos, I think, because we've grown rapidly from being, when I joined the company 2.5 years ago, of being sort of 20 of us, and we were all sort of sat around a couple of desks, so everyone knew everything that was going on very organically and naturally to now being 70 or so across three offices has meant that we've had to put more formal sharing processes into place and more regularized catch-ups and structures, but we have a culture where people want to know and they want to be involved, and Insight is very well regarded within the organization, so everyone kind of wants to know what's the latest thing, so everyone's working together.
Yeah. Greta, yes?
My question is to Richard again. You mentioned about briefly how you, as BBC Three, went from being, in this world where everything is controlled by like a currency that's like one version of the truth, and now into this world where you are distributing across different channels, where there is like a lot of different ways of looking at this. And I just wondered how much of a transition that was for everyone like working with you, i.e. your stakeholders, and how you kind of tackled that from an insights perspective to, and maybe also give an outlook of where you see this moving next, i.e. What do you ask the industry to do to help things like that?
Well, yeah, it's a big change in the sense that what we found is no one's really doing quite what we're doing. So we're sort of having to learn and in a sense, make up some of the rules as to how we measure and the choices that we're having to make in terms of deciding what's important, how we measure it, what metrics we choose to use, because there's so many metrics you could choose, and sort of weights to assign them. So we're both having to learn ourselves and at the same time educate stakeholders in a situation where, sometimes, we're learning at the same time as they are. So it's sort of a very sort of challenging, it has been a sort of very challenging place to be, but exciting at the same place. Where I see us going? Well, I think the industry is going to take a while to catch up to where we are. So, bar sort of traditional currency is a long way from sort of starting to measure some of the things that we're doing. So I think for the sort of medium and for the foreseeable future, I think this sort of messy integration of stuff from different sources, I don't think we're going to get away from that. And I think in terms of the media world, I think more companies are going to have to be playing in more spaces. So the sort of nightmares we've had, probably some of you guys are going to be having a few more of yourselves going forward.
Is that James with the mic? I can't quite see. Yeah.
Thank you. James Witchley from the Insight Management Academy. My question was for Claire and Richard, really, but Cristina might have a perspective on this as well. I was struck from your answers when you addressed the question to start with, that a lot about making Insight greater than the sum of its parts had less to do with generating better insight and more to do with the other things that Insight teams did as well. So the way they engaged the business to really nail the business issue, the way that they then subsequently tried to influence stakeholders, the way they managed the accumulated knowledge that they got from lots of different pieces of work. And I wondered how difficult you found it to make the space to do that within your companies, and whether you had a tip in terms of how you persuaded your stakeholders that that was actually a worthwhile activity for the Insight team to do. Maybe some of them had previously got a conception that research teams were there to do market research and analysis teams there to do analysis, whereas I think what we're all saying is that Insight is rather more than that.
So one of the things when I sort of said that we wanted to get stakeholders on board, it's not really just in the communication. So one of the things that we sort of think about is, particularly as we're starting to play in these new spaces, we as Insight people are learning as well, is we bring editorial people in quite early and help get them to help us together see what the story is. So look at the data and understand together. So we're not going to editorial teams saying, we've looked at the data, this is the answer. A lot of times we're getting the data, interpreting it, we're cutting out a lot of the chaff, trying to remove the noise, and trying to sort of get the signal. But at the point at which you're interpreting and trying to make a story and trying to tell that story, a lot of times we're bringing our editorial guys in quite earlier than we would have done in an old TV world where we knew what we were doing much more, I guess. So my sort of plea is, in terms of generating those stories, is bring the people who have different perspectives and expertise in early. And it's about actually identifying those people who you think, are willing and have the time to invest at the right, invest that effort and time at the right time for you. But it's really worth it.
I'd agree. I think definitely involving people as early on as possible and making sure that insight teams are involved in as early as possible in every project. So now at our organisation, every creative brief that goes out has to go through Insight to check that there's nothing extra that could be added from things we've learnt elsewhere, and that we're being really clear about the objectives and the KPIs for every piece of creative. And similarly, therefore, every briefing meeting, there needs to be someone from Insight in there so that the agencies are getting the full picture from Word dot to help make sure that the work that comes back is to the best standard possible, and therefore it's making people's lives easier. I think just demonstrating impact is the key way to make sure that senior stakeholders give you that space and allow you to have more resource, have more time, have the tools that you need to give your team the times to think. It's just, demonstrating the impact, showing this is how we are applying this to this strategy. And also, I guess, in the converse, kind of saying, actually, had we had more time, this is how we could have done something different. Explaining that gives you then the sort of the leverage for the next time it comes around to be able to get that time.
Just to add one more point, I think sometimes we need to have the courage to our stakeholders say we've got to do a bit less. So say, actually, some of the stuff that we do probably isn't adding as much value as this other stuff that we could do. And sometimes those decisions are difficult because stakeholders are used to getting X, Y, Z report and, but it's sort of, with the explosion of data we're seeing from our perspective, we can't do everything that we used to do in quite the same way. Not unless they give us more people, and not going to do that.
The old thing on its head, isn't it? People want you to do more with less. You have to do less with more.
Yeah, I mean, we can do it to a certain extent and get more efficient, but not that efficient.
Cristina, do you have a perspective from
the it's different
side?
From the agency. What we do is sometimes that neuroscience metrics or the things that we do are quite complex or different to what the stakeholders would normally receive. If what we do is to train and to give workshops to the inside people in the organization, to really be familiar and confident that when they go with new research, they know how to answer the questions. Otherwise, there's a kind of desire in many organizations that we want to do neuroscience, and then it's like, but what, how, and how we are going to interpret. And about this excitement, you need to, after it's going to be, it has a value of it, but you need to really know what is behind, and explain the added value. And then these people, when they are trained, they are just, now I'm much more confident. I can go to my stakeholders and respond to all the tough questions that I had, beyond the normal KPIs that they will ask you for any type of research. So I think training people as well is important when a new area of research emerges.
Okay, so in one line to finish off, what is your top tip for helping your organization, or Cristina, helping your clients to connect all those messy dots that are all over the place now?
Common sense.
Invest in your teams, in your people, and not just in their research skills, but in their softer side of skills to help them be consultants across the business.
My thing, I'd come back to what I was saying before about getting the importance of different perspectives. People with different expertise and different lenses can help generate the sort of the best and most meaningful stories, I think.
That's great. Cristina, Claire, Richard, thank you very much indeed.